Thank you for coming. Today, Senator Perdue and I are unveiling what we've named the RAISE Act, which stands for Reforming American Immigration for Strong Employment. The title should give you an idea of why we're offering this bill. Over the last 40 years, we've seen a huge increase in immigration. As you can see in this first chart, in the past 25 years alone, we're running an average of 1 million immigrants per year, which is far above the historical norm. It's like adding the population of Montana every year, or the population of Arkansas every 3 years. Next chart. As the second chart shows, only 1 out of every 15 immigrants is coming here for employment reasons. If we really needed all of these people because of their skills, because they've helped the economy grow, they'd be coming here on, say, an EB-1 or an EB-2 visa. But they're not. Instead, we let them in without consideration of our workforce's needs. Well, put those two together, and what do you get? Next chart. A sharp decline in wages for working Americans, as you can see here. Those with college and professional degrees are doing just fine. But those with a high school diploma have seen their wages fall by 2% since 1979. And for those without one, it's 17%. Now, is automation a factor? Is globalization? Sure. But there's no denying this generation-long surge in low-skilled immigration has hurt blue-collar wages. It's pulling the rug out from underneath them. And unless we reverse this trend, we're going to create a near-permanent underclass for whom the American dream is always just out of reach. Senator Perdue and I think it's time for our immigration system to start working for American workers. The RAISE Act would help increase wages by returning immigration levels to their historical norms and rebalancing the system toward merit-based immigration. There are 3 main parts of the bill. First, we prioritize immediate family members. We keep immigration preferences for spouses and unmarried minor children of citizens and green card holders, but eliminate them for extended relatives, like parents, adult siblings, and adult children. Second, we eliminate the 50,000 visas in the diversity lottery, which is rampant with fraud, provides no discernible economic or humanitarian benefit, and doesn't even promote diversity. Third, we limit the number of green cards offered to refugees to 50,000 per year, which is in line with historical averages under Presidents Bush and Obama and consistent with President Trump's recent guidance. The net effect will be to cut annual immigration in half, from 1 million to 500,000 green cards per year. This approach is broadly consistent with past reform measures, and it would begin to move us towards a more merit-based system like Canada and Australia have. Most important, it would promote higher wages on which working Americans can build a future, whether your family came over on the Mayflower or whether you just took the oath of citizenship. Senator Perdue, the podium is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, and I appreciate your interest in this topic today. You know, for the last 35, 40 years, we've been dealing with immigration as if it had one component, and that's the illegal issue. Today, the RAISE Act raises this point to talk about the legal immigration issues that our country faces. It's made dramatic changes you've just seen here in these charts over the last 50 years. But the 100-year average is the one you have to look at. These norms we've gone totally away from those norms. The RAISE Act restores American legal immigration back to some of these historical norms by addressing the family immigration issue, by eliminating this outdated lottery system and totally rationalizing the refugee program. This is a first step. It's not a sweeping, comprehensive attempt to solve all legal immigration problems, nor does it address illegal issues. We are simply trying today to bring a rational, compassionate approach to this different issue within the immigration conversation. Legal immigration has been part of America's heritage here. We're all derivatives of people who came into this country, legally, I might add. And so what we're trying to do here is add a common sense, compassionate approach to legal immigration. Again, it's just the first step, and I think we'll take your questions now. Thank you. Yes?
So there's 2 questions. One, can you give us a description of your conversations with the White House, and in particular President Trump, about this? And then secondly, You talked about the average for immigration. What about the population growth, which is actually below average? And some people say, well, immigration helps balance that.
So first, I've discussed the legislation with President Trump as a concept in the fall and as recently as this morning. He strongly supports the broad concept of moving our legal immigration system towards a merit-based system as opposed to the unthinking system that we have right now that has unlimited chain migration and a needless diversity lottery and an uncapped refugee program. We've also been in close contact with various members of his staff as we've worked on the details as well. Second, we are at historically high levels of immigration in this country. And I think it's been over 100 years since we've been at the same level of foreign-born persons as a percentage of our country. That just goes to show you what Senator Perdue and I were talking about earlier, that we have reached historically high levels, and of course that's had a negative effect on blue-collar wages. So all we're trying to do is return back to historic levels, which would still be one of the most generous and open immigration systems in the world.
Let me just add to your second part of the question. Our birth rate in America is below average of the last 50 years. And this is an economic issue as well. There are two ways you grow the economy, GDP. One is population growth, two is productivity growth. But when 1 out of every 16 legal immigrants come into the country are merit-based EB candidates, that's a problem. And so that's what we're trying to address in this bill.
Senators, following up on your conversation with the President about this, I'm curious if you've gotten any sense from him or from aides where things stand on doing something about DACA and DAPA, and whether that is of concern to you that there hasn't been anything done yet on that issue. And then secondly, you mentioned the fraud in the lottery system. What specifically are you concerned about regarding fraud in that system?
I have not had any specific conversations with the President about DACA or DAPA. The lottery system gives about 55,000 visas a year, and it's supposedly based on diversity. Surprisingly, it benefits Europe more than almost any other region in the world besides Africa. But like many of our immigration programs, there are ways to game the system. There are ways to work around some of the procedures that are in place. And then once you get here, you have a green card and you can open up immigration, not just to your immediate family, but your extended family, your village, your clan, your tribe. I don't think that works for American workers.
Again, what we're talking about today, just I might add, in the past we've tried comprehensive approaches to immigration. What we're talking about today is now let's begin breaking this into its components. This is a fairly direct, compassionate approach dealing with families primarily and a couple other issues relative to refugees. Work-related, employment-related issues are very serious out there. H-1B, H-2A, EB, all of those need to be addressed, and they will get addressed in due time.
And I would
Any concerns that it hasn't come up yet, or?
No, this is not a comprehensive approach. Today we're just talking about what we're doing relative to the families.
And I would add to what Senator Perdue said. Most of the provisions of this bill reflect past failed efforts at comprehensive immigration reform. Most of those provisions did restrict unlimited family chain migration. They did eliminate the diversity lottery, for instance. So we're borrowing on some of the smart provisions of past efforts that we think reflects what's best for American workers. We explicitly do not touch any category of employment-based immigration in this bill, whether green cards or temporary visas.
Senator Cotton, under your proposal, if I were to come in, if this became law, if I were to come in, I could not bring my adult parents. Is that correct?
Correct. Only your spouse or your unmarried minor child.
With one
there's one caveat that for an elderly parent who is ill,
right,
we create a temporary visa so you can bring your parent to this country as long as you can vouch that that parent will not work, that parent will not take public benefits, and that you can support that parent.
Is your intent to make immigration less attractive for people if they can't? If I know I can come, but I can't bring my parents, and therefore I might be less inclined to immigrate to the United States?
No, our intent is to have an immigration system that works for American citizens. I think the premise of your question is looking at it from the wrong way. It looks at it from what's good for the foreigner, not what's good for American citizens. What's good for American citizens is that we have an immigration system that rewards skills and language ability and demonstrated economic potential, as well as demonstrated economic need. I feel for my fellow man, but I serve my fellow citizen, and our current immigration system simply does not serve our citizens very well.
What's the path forward on the Hill here? Have you talked to your Republican leadership about this, and how do you hope this will, how and when do you hope this will be addressed?
Well, obviously, we're very busy in the Senate, in part because the Democrats are obstructing all of the nominees for the president's cabinet. I do hope that this legislation, because it is so targeted and it addresses some of the concerns about blue-collar wages that Democratic senators have had on some of the temporary visa programs, that we can find support for it and maybe move it forward later in this year. Obviously, it's a controversial topic, but we're going to be working closely not only with our leadership, but with Democratic senators who share these concerns that we have about working-class wages.
Senator Perdue, particularly in the state of Georgia, the agriculture sector, you have some of the folks I know you talk to who say they can't get other folks to take these jobs. How does this improve blue-collar wages? How do you get more Americans getting blue-collar wages by getting rid of immigrants?
Well, the RAISE Act primarily just deals with rationalizing numbers back to historical norms, and by the way, using guidelines that have been used before in America and proven to be successful. We'll deal with the employment issues of H-2A and H-1B. These are definite programs that need to be revamped. We've gotten that feedback from our constituents back home in Arkansas and Georgia and frankly all over the country. So we're going to address that in due time. Today we're really focusing on the first piece of legal immigration. The second piece of legal immigration has to do with the employment-based visas, and we will get to that.
But you said this is about improving blue-collar wages. I'm just curious how it will do that.
Well, it's a supply and demand issue, first of all. Second of all, it's a mix of labor. As a business guy, I know right now there are many skilled jobs in America going without workers. And so there are also low-skilled jobs going without workers. At the same time, though, we see the records here and the data, and you see wages being absolutely depressed because of the supply of low-skilled workers. I go back to the statistic. 1 out of every 16 or 1 of every 15 immigrants, legal immigrants, are skilled immigrants. Now, it doesn't take a genius to know that's not right. And so historically, that's not the way it used to be. And that's what we're trying to do is move back to those historical norms.
You've referenced historical norms. Does this mean moving the immigration system back to the way it was between 1924 and 1965, or something different than that?
So I would say in 1924 and 1965, it was probably too restrictionist. Certainly in some of the treatment of refugees and asylees, especially during the 1930s and 1940s. That was in part, though, in 1924 because it had taken so long during the second great wave of immigration from the 1880s to the 1920s to address the very real concerns of the American people. What Senator Perdue and I would like to do is address these now and start getting a handle on legal immigration. Overall, we'll probably see a reduction in the number of immigrants. As Senator Perdue just said, you might see an increase in certain categories where there is an empirical and demonstrated need for more immigrant labor, particularly among the high-skilled and the ultra-high-skilled. But we would hope that we have a legal-based immigration system that serves the needs of American citizens and our workers, and that would still be very generous. This bill would still let in 500,000 immigrants a year without even touching yet employment-based immigration.
Yeah, did it surprise you as you were digging into this how disconnected and unrelated different programs were? It seems like this is an attempt to bring everything online. Maybe you could just speak about that.
Well, what we have is an immigration process. It's an amalgamation of over 100 years of really disconnected and disjointed laws, like you say. Let me give you an example. There really has not been a comprehensive study that I know of that looks at legal immigration based on economic objectives of GDP growth and population growth, as we discussed earlier. We want to move in that rigorous direction to talk about a more comprehensive look at what the needs of American immigration are. And so this number today is a derivative number. It's not we didn't set out to achieve that number. It's just a derivative. If you make these changes, that's the estimate that we'll have on it.
Yeah, and I would say we focus on the policy and what we think the needs of the American people are, as well as what's humane in terms of, immediate family reunification, capping the refugee program, and eliminating the diversity lottery. The numbers fall out where they fell out. What strikes me about our current immigration system over the last 50 or so years is that it's become kind of piecemeal, something that no one really voted for and very few people like. So this is our first step to try to return it to historical norms and make it work for the American citizen and the American worker.
And legislatively, I know this is just one piece, but is there an amnesty carrot that's dangling somewhere to
No.
get something through?
No, and like I said, this is a very targeted bill because it only addresses non-employment-based immigration. There are other legal immigration programs that are focused on employment skills. Then you have all the measures surrounding security and enforcement, like a border wall and interior enforcement and entry-exit visa systems. And then you have the status of those people who are here illegally today. We think we can look at this specific problem without addressing any of those other issues. We think we should get a lot of support on this specific issue.
Thank you.
And when it comes to the diversity lottery, that has been held, or that has helped some refugees escape places like Somalia and whatnot. Why do away with that? Because earlier you said there's
But that's not the diversity. That's not the point of the diversity lottery. If we're going to have a refugee program to help refugees, as I believe we should within reason, it should be part of our refugee program. It shouldn't be part of a diversity lottery that was designed not to support refugees and currently serves no economic purposes as well.
Just another follow-up on your conversations with the White House. Is it accurate for us then to say that this is sort of the White House's bill, or what?
I wouldn't characterize President Trump's view on specific pieces of legislation, but you're welcome to ask them, and we're happy to have his endorsement specifically. But he did say, as recently as this morning, that he strongly supports the concept of this legislation of trying to reorient our legal immigration system towards merit-based approaches like Canada, like Australia has. He obviously has a lot of initiatives on the security and enforcement front. A lot of those he can do through his own authority that's been delegated to him by Congress. He may come for additional authorities, but specifically on legal immigration, he strongly supports moving towards a merit-based program.
And with Senator Sessions leaving, we presume tomorrow to be Attorney General, should we see you two as sort of picking up his mantle and dealing with these issues? He's been the guy for the last several years that was legal immigration controls and other. Should it be assumed that you guys are picking that up now?
Senator Sessions is irreplaceable. David.
Well, I'll just say, look, this is a new approach. Senator Sessions had a lot of issues he championed. We have a lot of issues we champion. What you see today is, we hope, a beginning of a new approach, and that is, let's break these out into their individual components where you can get consensus and then move on. And I think you're going to see a rational, compassionate approach to overall immigration, not just illegal immigration.
You mentioned some of the other priorities of this Congress on immigration, funding this wall, and some of the security enforcement initiatives. Where do you see this as fitting in the list of priorities in terms of what your colleagues are willing to take on? And is it a one-at-a-time thing? And if so, where does this
So I think one thing that's been demonstrated over the last 31 years is that that Congress is not able to pass any kind of comprehensive immigration bill, nor should they, on the model of the 1986 bill, because the model for that bill was legalization first, enforcement later, which meant enforcement never. I think it's better to focus on discrete problems around which we can build bipartisan consensus. That's why we propose this as a discrete bill. Now, if President Trump comes to us and says he needs additional authorities to build the wall, or to build an entry-exit visa system, or to cooperate with local police authorities, and this can be part of that legislation, we're open to those kind of legislative tactics. But we do not think this should be part of a broad, grand, comprehensive bill of the kinds that have failed so many times in the last 31 years.
And just, you mentioned before, in terms of advocating for blue-collar workers, do you think that some Democrats should sign on to this? Have there been any discussions on the off chance that you've talked to Democrats
A few
about?
preliminary, but as you might imagine, they're pretty focused right now on the president's cabinet nominations. Again, if you look at some legislation that Democratic senators have proposed around temporary work visas, different programs, not impacted by this legislation, but driven by the same concerns, wanting an immigration system that focuses on those who have fallen behind in recent decades in our economy.
Have you guys spoken with Leader McConnell about this plan?
Yes, I mean, this is one that has been, we're going to get support among the Republican caucus. I think there are some Democrats that the ethos of this bill fits a lot of the desires of some of our Democrat partners. And so again, within the priorities of what we have going in front of us right now, we'll get to this in due time. But we're hopeful that we'll see this on the floor of the Senate this year.
Last question. Your conversation with the president was on the phone this morning?
Yes, it was. That doesn't count since it was so short.
Yeah, I was worried as I called. Given the hurdles here at the Capitol, have you talked to Senator Sessions about doing anything administratively through the Justice Department and for
taking any executive action?
Well, the Attorney General obviously has significant discretion, as does the Secretary of DHS and the President under current immigration law. That discretion is primarily focused on security and enforcement measures, like building a wall under the Secure Border Fence Act of 2006. There's some discretion around the refugee program as well to increase or decrease those numbers. This legislation, though, really is going to be necessary to start to get a handle on levels of legal immigration. That's not something that current law largely entrusts to the President. It's something that current law largely entrusts to the people's representatives in Congress. So we hope to have an ally in Senator Sessions, but this is not something in which current law delegates much authority to him.
And just lastly, can I get both your reaction to the Labor Secretary saying last night that he employed a housekeeper who was not permitted to work in the U.S.? Does that affect whether or not you're going to support?
No comment on the specific. No comment on the particular details. I haven't reviewed them yet. I will say I would review that nomination the way I have every other nomination for Donald Trump and Barack Obama on the whole picture and an entire lifetime of work and an entire lifetime of actions.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
I have info sheets if anyone needs it.